everybody. I have been looking forward to this discussion for quite some time. I have some friends of mine who I've got a chance to know over the last couple of months, actually some of them over a couple of years here, and we're just going to have an honest conversation about race in the Chattahoochee Valley in 2018. So this discussion today is designed to just put the elephant that's already in the room in the middle of the discussion. Y'all, let's just have a conversation together. Is racism a thing of the past? Let me qualify this statement for just a second. How would you address somebody who says things like, well, there are no black people that are slaves anymore, so it's really not a problem today in 2018? How would y'all answer that question?
Well, I start. First of all, is racism a thing of the past? And I would say absolutely not. We live in a community, a country that are still plagued by the effects of people thinking less of others because of the color of their skin or their culture. And what I would say to people that would say that it's no longer, you have to understand, even though yes, there's no blacks who live in slavery, so to speak, but however, we live in the effects of what slavery did. And that is what I think people need to understand. Of course, there's not slavery like it was back in those days, but the effects of slavery is very, very real. And that's what I think you see. That's something that we need to address and need to understand.
Okay.
I agree, Jeff, with Derek, that you can't encapsulate or restrict racism to an event or to a time within our past. You have to realize that as long as there are people, they have preferences, and those preferences, they pull on them. And the preferences that many of us have, and that's just not any particular race, I think that's all of us. We have a specific preference that we are drawn to. But when that preference becomes problematic is when we become extreme with it and say, I only want to be associated with, or I only want to be around. And I think that every time, a baby is born, they have the potential of being exposed to those extremities. And it becomes our responsibility, number one, to be aware, and to not act as if it's not what it is. So I definitely agree that you can't just call it, well, we're so far from slavery. No, it's much more. It's how we live. It's who we affiliate ourselves with. And if we do so because of a preference in an extreme, that's when we have the problem. Yeah.
And the problem has to be addressed by all involved in the problem. And so when you look at the telephone, it has evolved. We don't communicate on our phones the way we did back in the early 1900s. I mean, it has developed and evolved. And so just because slavery is not encompassed with a plantation and picking cotton doesn't mean that slavery doesn't have its own connotation or it's not adhered to a certain group of people. And just because it's not just people of color, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. But I think we're talking about two different things. Slavery or racism doesn't exist because there's no one enslaved. Racism is not the act of slavery, it's the act of choosing someone over someone else based on color or where they're from or things like that. So
hey, good. I will probably quote you, Pastor Michael, in a sermon series when you said it's when a preference becomes a problem.
Yeah.
And all of us have preferences. Yeah. But when preferences become a problem, now we're talking racism, and obviously that didn't end in 1865.
Absolutely.
Right.